Welcome to the Standing Stone Podcast. This week's episode, Charles, our host, and Fred Rice headed to the Pacific Northwest and had a number of different great conversations. This is part 1 of 4. They had the opportunity to sit down with Ron Laird and Jim McCue. Ron was a big field trialer in the mid-'80s, and this is a really cool look into the past. Conversation about how dogs were trained way back, as well as when there was the opportunity to train on thousands of wild birds. It's really cool to look at our history. We hope that you enjoy. I want to take a second to thank patrons, the largest supporter of everything Standing Stone. If you're interested in becoming a patron or supporting this podcast, check it out at patreon.com/standingstonekennels. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
He was a field champion, an amateur field champion, a national field champion.
Was he a national
gun dog?
Amateur field champion or
both?
Both. So a field champion, amateur field champion. Was he a national field champion and a national amateur field champion?
He won the national, and they were both by two different handlers.
Well, let's talk about that, okay? I want to talk about that stuff, and then Shiloh.
Yeah.
And I remember you telling me the story how you acquired Jack, right?
Yep.
So anyway.
About the same. That's a really good picture. Doc must have taken that of old Shiloh.
I haven't seen that photo.
I haven't. He probably showed it to me when he took it, but I'll bet your dad took that, didn't he?
Maybe.
I'll bet he did. He was always out there taking pictures of something.
76 and 78.
Yeah. And he's the son of Blick.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
And then
Blick was ran by John Merrill. Blick was probably John's one of his bigger dogs, that he ever. And John, of course, he's in the Hall of Fame and everything. And he was a heck of a trainer, but talk about a tough on dogs.
Yeah.
He was tough on dogs. A guy that was gunning for us one time, we had a trial up in Isle Park, and John was up there. And this guy come out, because I come out of the trailer. He says, my heck, that dog, that John Merrill, he tunes them dogs up. I said, what happened? He said he walked out of the kennel and said, shut up. And they didn't shut up. And he said he picked up a bucket, knocked them dogs, went down, tuned them right up there, and they never talked after that. They never barked.
Yeah. Didn't want the bucket treatment again.
But the training back in them days versus what you guys did, we didn't have shock collars. Even when I trained Shiloh, I didn't have a shock collar. I did have one, but an electric fence would turn it on. And if somebody else had another one, they pushed it, it would shock both dogs. And so you just did not use it and it had range about from here to that backhoe.
And was it like a single level one?
Yep.
Yeah.
There was no degrees of anything.
There was no stun.
A little old box. And it wasn't a Tritronic, it was some other thing.
Yeah.
And it was basically worthless because by the time you wanted it and needed it, it didn't work.
Yeah.
So we were out there chasing them down. I can remember chasing that potlicker down, grabbing him and tuning him up and bringing him back. Whoa, I said, whoa. And he'd, what? Anyway, it was different back then.
On sage grouse?
Just planted birds trying to get him broke.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But once I got these dogs broke, I hunted them all, wild birds, and I kept them broke. Mm-hmm. Shooting the birds meant nothing to me. It was making sure my dog handled those wild birds correctly. And then when I'd go to a trial, it was a walk in the park with those planted birds. Heck, you could go through that and your dog, it didn't matter what happened.
Yeah.
They could, those chuckers would get up and walk around under your dog and around and everything else. I remember one time I was at a field trial, and this was one of my little pointers. She was just a beautiful little dog. And I think she'd won, for that year, we'd entered 22 times. She'd won 21 first and 1 second. And this last time she got kicked out. And she came on point, and I walked up to her, and there was a chucker walking there, and it walked under her, right between her legs, and she twisted around to watch it, and the guy said, she sat down, she's done. You stupid shit, you don't know what you're talking, but you accept what the judges say, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
But she was just a phenomenal little dog. In fact, the dogs that I had, they were Shiloh and Jack and a dog by the name of Snoopy, who was out of Shiloh, bred to a guy here in Idaho Falls, Angel's Queen of Point, who was really a big-time derby, but he never could get her broke. She was one of those white dogs. And he just, and then I had 2 or 3 other dogs, but all but one dog, any day, even with Jack, they could beat one another. They were all that good at one time. It was talk about fun. You'd go out there and turn them loose in a big old stubble field, pheasants running. You get 3 or 4 dogs that are broke, and that cuts those pheasants off from running because he's out there coming this way and that way. Pretty soon there's 2 or 3 dogs on point.
Well,
and it's
Charles and I were just talking about that coming up here about the way people used to think, oh, you got to have a close working dog for pheasants.
Yeah.
And, oh, you can't let them get out.
Let them run.
That's totally wrong.
Yeah. But I believed that when I first started with short-haired.
Yeah.
And you wanted, in case they didn't get it pointed and it flushed, you had to be able to shoot it.
Right.
So you got to keep them within gun range.
Yep.
And so it was, but once you finally learn what you're trying to achieve, then it's like Doc told me. He said, a pointing dog is to cover country that you don't have to walk.
Exactly.
He says, if you're just going to hunt country, you just will get a flushing dog and flush what you see. But you want that dog out there far enough that he's covering country that you're not going to cover. And when he comes on point, then you walk over to him. And that was the theory. But I didn't have that for a long time. When I was growing up, it was keep him close, keep him close. I'd go hoarse, yelling at the, get back here, get back here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took me a while, and it just took letting the dogs loose. And then you start to realize that what I always say is I always think, especially with pheasants, that it's that if the dog and the bird are working something out, they can figure it out. But when you're involved, you're kind of a wild card. The pheasant, it knows how to deal with stuff like dogs. You know, it has some tricks, and they'll pull them. They'll loop around and run behind them. But it just seems like when you let the two work together and just let it figure each other out, I got so many more pointed birds.
Oh yeah.
So many, and then also, for me, it helped a lot too. Is I got GPS, so I was able to be like, okay, I feel comfortable now. You know, I'm in Iowa. You're in a 60-acre slough, and I can't see the person 10 feet to my right.
Cover that high.
Well, sometimes that head high. So that was when I also realized that when that dog's taking off and I see him up there working 100, 200, all of a sudden, bam. When I was calling those dogs back, they were working running birds, and I wasn't getting
aware of it. Yeah.
Didn't even know. It wasn't getting appointed. Yeah. So,
well, I want to steer us back to, introduction here, why we're here, what we want to talk about. This is all, of course, part of it. But first of all, I just want to say, Ron, thank you for taking the time. Let us come up here and visit you in your beautiful home. And Jim. So Jim is the son of your partner, Doctor. You mentioned, you call him Doc?
Yep, I called him Doc.
So your partner, Jim McCue, and we'll hear all the story about how you guys started and came together.
Yep.
But and I just want to give a little piece here. It's like, I started doing some posts a few years ago about some of these old dogs of the past that were foundational dogs, historic dogs. And I did one on Jack, Buyer's Evolution. And somehow I think your family, your granddaughter heard about it. And she messaged me on Facebook and told me, hey, my grandpa heard that, you did a little post on his dog and he'd really like to talk to you. I got your phone number. And then we talked. And now here we are today. And it's led to me talking and connecting to some other people as well, which I didn't even think it would be possible. But I just want to say, hey, we're thrilled to have this chance to come here and talk to you. I guess maybe we could talk about how where you're from. How did you get started in this?
Well, I'm from about 20 miles away from here. I was raised in DuBois, which is just right over here, 25 miles from here. And back in those days, starting to rain. Back in those days, there was pheasants, a lot of pheasants, all through Hamer, Mud Lake, all that country.
They were pretty much in the backyard too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they were everywhere.
There was just a phenomenal amount of pheasants. You could shoot 4 a day the whole season. And even on a certain week or so, you could shoot a hen or two. And so I was raised with my dad. He loved to hunt pheasants. And he was always, we need to get a dog. We need to get a dog. And somebody dropped a German Shorthair off in town. And he seen it, so he picked it up and kind of became friends with it. We took it hunting. And it did. It went down there and pointed. It was just a natural instinct of the breed. And, of course, I can remember Dad saying, get back here, just like we were talking, because he was the old school. They were out there to get birds. And that dog lasted a year or so. And anyway, he's always going to get another one. And he did. He got a Springer Spaniel and different things. But as I got older in high school, I didn't have a dog, but I hunted constantly. I graduated from West Jefferson High School, and I'd go hunting pheasants every night after school. And I remember the year, as a senior year opening day, I have 3 friends that hunted a lot. He says, and this wasn't hunting, this was just seeing how fast we could do it. He says, let's see how fast we can get 16, you could shoot 4 birds. There was 4 of us, 16 roosters. See how fast we can get them right after noon. It opened at noon. It took us 12 minutes.
Wow.
But we knew right where the birds were. And instead of walking and enjoying it, punk kids running down the ditch, as dangerous as can be with loaded shotguns, but there were just birds everywhere. I can remember seeing in high school pheasants sitting on power lines, drooping down 5 feet. The power line was drooping down it. And I never even knew pheasants sat on power lines to that point. I wish I'd have had a camera back then, because they just would, but there was just hundreds of them. And probably shouldn't say this in case there's a game warden around, but we hunted pheasants year-round. I had some old guys that ran some stores down there. They'd say, hey, get me a pheasant. I'll give you 25 cents a piece for them. So we hunted pheasants, sage chickens, ducks. That's how we had all our spending money in high school. Mm-hmm. But there were so many, you thought there'll never be a day that there won't be pheasants.
Yeah.
But with the changing in agriculture the way it is now, it used to be all flood irrigation, ditch banks, and now it's all circles. They've done away with all their cover. And then we had real infestation of fox, and the fox are tough on pheasants. And then just magpies and getting the eggs and stuff. You can't hardly find a pheasant down there now. In fact, they have to plant pheasants in 2 or 3 different spots. It's the only way you can really go down there. And I just don't even do it. I just don't even do it anymore.
Yeah.
But that's how I got started through high school. And then after I got married, we moved to Idaho Falls. And I loved it. And there were still a lot of pheasants, so I wanted a point dog. And I looked in the post register, and I seen some guy that had Llewellyn setters, puppies. I thought, well, I don't know anything about them, but I'll try it. So I went and bought one. And it did point a time or two, but it wasn't what I wanted. It got in the cockleburs. I was having to clean the cockleburs out of the long hair all the time. So I don't even know if I sold it or give it away. And then I thought, I think I want a short hair again. And that's how I found Doc. Somebody said, well, there's a guy out in Idaho Falls that raises and, breeds them and sells them. So I got a hold of Doc and started using him as a dentist. We just became good friends. And I bought my first short hair from him. It was Pelz Blitz Poe. And she was just a nice hunting dog. Not an exceptional amount of style, but, adequate style, great nose. And I just started playing around and making a hunting dog out of her. And visiting with Doc, asking him questions. And he finally invited me to a fun trial, because there was a short hair club at that time. Mm-hmm. So I went to the fun trial and seen what some of these dogs, because I didn't really know what steady to wing and shot was at that time, and seeing some of the dogs that was that way. And I thought, that's kind of cool. So I'll see if I can do that with her. And for the next 2 or 3 months, I got her broke, went to another fun trial, and I won that fun trial. If you want to get hooked on something, just win.
Yeah.
It helps.
What years was that?
That would have had to have been about 1969 or 70, somewhere right around there.
Okay.
And I won the fun trial, and I remember I think the reason I won her, because she was really an exceptional retriever. She retrieved ducks and everything for me. And she come on point, and that pigeon flew off, and the guy shot it, and he wounded it, and it flew out there about 200 or 300 yards and fell. And she was standing there, and I said, "Do you want me to get the retrieve?" And he said, "Oh, she can't get it. It's too far." I said, "She can get it." I called her by name, and she went out and brought that pheasant back. Tex Haney was the judge. He said, "Man, that's really great." So that makes you feel good, that your dog did something that somebody that you think really knows what he's talking about. And so that's what kind of got me started. I had a friend that lived in Mud Lake. He wanted one, so I got him in touch with Doc, and he bought another one. And his name was Pelsblitz Moose, great big old short hair. And we checked bloodlines, and they were close. So we bred them and sold some pups and stuff, So I think we sold the pups for $50 back then, or even 25, and some of them you'd give away. You had so many, you needed to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Now, say that again about where did Moose come into this?
That was the dog that Steve Cherry, a friend of mine, bought from your dad. His name was Moose, and he was really a big old short.
Yeah, I remember Moose.
Yeah.
In fact, I always said he was my big brother.
Oh.
but I didn't realize that must have been after I went away to school.
That he sold him.
He sold him. Yeah,
He sold your brother.
Exactly.
But Steve wasn't into it like I was. But we hunted. I mean, we would shoot literally hundreds of pheasants over those dogs, and the more you did it, the more you got into it. And then after the field trial, I thought, this is fun. So I went for a couple of years, just fun trialing. And Doc would invite me to, a pretty good shot back then, he'd invite me to come out and shoot for some of the trials, the actual AKC trials. Mm-hmm. So I got a chance to watch some good dogs. And that kind of got me hooked. And so I started looking around, and Doc and I was talking, and we found I can't remember the guy's name, but he had Shiloh, and he was a Derby dog at that age. And
so another guy owned Shiloh.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was a Derby. He was a Derby age.
Okay.
And he'd bought him from John Merrill through the breeding of Blick, because he liked, Blick was a big dog back in then. If you wanted really a hot dog, you got to get something from Blick. And back in them days, you could, put them on an airplane. They'd fly him back and forth, which you can't do anymore. And so he had this puppy. He bought it as a puppy and sent out. And he didn't know what to do with that dog. That dog had him trained instead of him training the dog. Uh-huh. And he was just frustrated.
Really?
Doc and I was talking. He said, Doc says, maybe we ought to try to buy that dog. Whatever. I had about zero money. Doc had money. He said, I'll try to buy it, and we'll go partners if you'll train it. I said, let's try it, see what happens. And so we got him. And
now, where was this?
In Idaho Falls.
Idaho Falls?
Yep.
Okay.
And my dad run a petroleum business, and I was.
And Shiloh, who was the breeder on Shiloh?
Well, Blick was his dad. So, but I don't know, because we didn't buy him. You got his papers. You might have his papers there. I don't know.
I'll look up.
But
I got a lot here.
He's a Hall of Fame dog in the Hall of Fame too, so you can tell what it is. But I know Blick was his dad,
right?
And so we bought him, and I started working him. And man, that bugger's a handful.
Now, what do you mean by a handful?
He wouldn't do the same thing twice. He would go out, and I'd steady him up and looked like $1 million.
How old was he when you got him?
He was about 16 months, something like that.
Okay.
And a total renegade.
Teenager.
Yes. And me, I wasn't real experienced, but I knew what I was trying to achieve out of it.
Oh, you were.
And so
you had lots of energy and drive.
Yep. And Doc was really a fountain of information. And he couldn't train a dog, but he could tell you how to do it. And so I used him a lot. I'd say, okay, he's doing this. What do you think? And he'd give me some suggestions, and I'd go try them. And sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. You know how that goes.
Yep.
And anyway, we kept breaking him. I can remember one time I thought I had him broke really well. And I was going out training just before just before a trial and went out there. He broke on that bird, and I had him on a spike collar. You remember spike collars?
Yep.
The long check cord. And he broke on that bird just like he'd never been trained a day in his life. And he went by me, and I grabbed that check cord. And I said, you little... And I popped him once, and I swung him around like that on the end of the rope. And my wife was there. That was bad. She said, you got to get control of your temper, because you just don't do them kind of things to the dog.
Yeah.
And anyway, and I brought him back and set him, and then we worked again, and he worked fine. But I trialed him several different times. I remember over in Boise on a back, and this was just when I was kind of trying to learn.
So how old were you then?
I was probably 23 or 4, something like that.
And you just kind of started doing this?
Full of energy, And
did you have a trailer and a horse? And
didn't own any of that kind of stuff. Nope. And we went to a field trial. It was all walking.
Okay.
And the horseman was supposed to can set the pace, so I'd trot half the time around the field trials trying to keep up with the horse, because if you was back here and he was up there, he was running your dog just like if it was his dog. And anyway, the dog we come in, that was bird fields. Back in them days, you had bird fields. The dog had a back course, and I think he'd had one fine, handled it all pretty good, and come in, honored this dog. And I learned right then that if you're backing, you're getting beat. And so he coming back, and I walked up to him. Now, whoa. And it flushed, and he whoaed. And that handler shot the bird. That handler looked at his dog, looked at my dog, and said, fetch! My dog. And so right then I decided I don't want backs.
Yeah.
Even, but he did it intentionally. But I was just learning. And, anytime you're field trial or do anything else, you go through a period of time where you learn it's a game.
The hard way.
The hard way.
Right.
And the expensive way.
Yeah.
And so from that point on, I would make sure my dogs were back, but I didn't want a back. I wanted to be looking for birds that my dog could handle. And so
they didn't have to have a back to pass or to win.
Nope. All they had to have was a water retrieve. And some of those, after you get him all your points, then you say, okay, let's go have a water retrieve, and it'd be a little pond. I've seen some pretty pathetic water retrieves.
Yeah.
But if that dog, if he'd wade out there and pick up the bird and bring it back, good enough. But most of mine, I hunted them enough that they was really good in water. They liked water, because I hunted a lot of ducks and everything else with. Yeah. But that was the big thing, is you had to get a water retrieve.
Now, not to get too deep in the weeds here, but let's talk about dogs like that you're studying them for these trials. These are high-powered dogs.
Right.
And you didn't have e-collars.
Nope.
So can you share any?
Well, I ran most of the time with a long check cord. So I had the whole theory. The thing about a dog is you want to try to be one step ahead of what they're going to do. You want to anticipate what they are going to do. Mm-hmm. And even with a long check cord, you try to get up there close enough you can get the check cord as fast as you can. And then I would always stand on the cord back there and try to calm the dog down and let him get used to what's going on. And then I'd have somebody else, come up and hold the check cord. And then I never would walk right past him. I always went out around, because I found if you walk right past him, they're competitive. He's going to get to what I want. Mm-hmm. And so I'd come in, and when they were young, I always come straight in so I could look them right. And I said, whoa, you little bugger, stop. Whoa. And then, of course, to start with, I would always reach down and pick the bird up. And whoa, and let that dog see that bird in his hand. And I just let it fly off. Of course, talking about pigeons. Let it fly off, encourage him to whoa, whoa, whoa. And that's the way I always did it back in the old days. The nice thing I liked about shock collars, it wasn't the fact, you shock them, do that. It's the fact that you could instantaneously correct the problem. You couldn't train with them. Your dog had to know what he was supposed to do. But when you got that shock collar and he knew what he was supposed to do and he didn't do it right, instead of having to run up and grab him, you could just touch him right. And I never did like doing it hard, just to touch, because that'd, if they were going to go, they'd shake their head and say, what was that? And stop. And go back, pick them up. If they'd only moved a foot, you got to go back and put it back that 1 foot. Because, in a field trial, 1 foot will kill you.
Yeah.
If he just, that thing. And so repetition, that's the whole secret. Do the same thing time after time after time. And once shock collars come around, it speeded things up a lot. But I done basically the same thing up to that point to where the dogs knew what they were supposed to do before I ever used a shock collar.
Yeah.
And then once I got it broken, and it was even with Shiloh, but I chased him 1,000,000 times, bring him out on sage chickens. And I always started July 4th because the young birds were about that big. And they could, just enough they could fly, but your dog could point them, and they may get up and walk around. And the old mother would stand up and walk, take her babies off. And that old dog would just sit there and quiver. And if you could go through 3 or 4 times of that and he'd not move, then I'd go in there and start flushing them, banging, chasing them around and encouraging. That's what made these dogs what they are, is the sage grouse that I had the opportunity to train on. And it doesn't matter if it was Shiloh or Jack or Snoopy or Addie or Letty or Hank. That's the 6 dogs. That's the 6 dogs that I finished in the field championship. And I look back, and to have that many dogs, that good of dogs, both, and they were all both amateur and open champions, and to be able to have 6 of them in the career that I had, I felt that was pretty fortunate. And I put it all on the opportunity that I had of sage grouse and the amount of them.
Yeah, let's for the sake of the discussion, point out that where we're sitting right now, you've said is the largest
lek for sage grouse in eastern Idaho, right out here behind the house. And we'll have up to, not as many now, but there used to be 250 males would come out here to this lek and strut. And there would be 2 or 3 times more than that on hens. And then they would breed the hens, and of course the hens would go off and nest. And then about July 4th, I would start working them.
And so back in those days,
There was
those numbers were
10 times more than what there are now.
Yeah.
For one, I can remember going to a field trial one time, and
When are you saying that was there were 10 times more?
yeah, back when I was training Shiloh and
So in
and you go even way back farther than that, there was more even then than now.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. See, you could shoot 4 birds a day.
Were they a popular bird?
Opening day from Idaho Falls to DuBois, up that highway, it looked like just a steady line of lights. But it was usually a 1-day hunt. It was the first hunt in the fall. Everybody wanted to get out and go hunt sage
Knock the
chickens.
dust off. Yep.
And so it was a popular very few people used dogs because there was just so many of them. They'd line up 10 people wide and just walk up through the sagebrush.
And we have sage grouse, sharp-tailed grouse, blue grouse, rough grouse, and there was
Spruce
another
grouse.
Spruce grouse, all in this area.
Yep.
And huns.
And huns.
And
chuckers. There's a few chuckers.
Okay.
But you have to watch out that early in the year, and I had 2 different dogs killed with rattlesnakes.
Yeah.
And so you have to be a little careful. But when I was in Idaho Falls, most of the training was done out west of Idaho Falls and close to those lava beds and stuff. And there was a lot more rattlesnakes out there. And there was very few sage chickens. I had to come to Mud Lake to really get the sage grouse. But you could get, I remember the last year that I hunted Old Poe, the season was 2 weeks. I come out every night after work, killed 4 birds, and I missed 1 shot the whole season. Of course, that was back in the days when I even wanted to keep track of how many shots you missed.
Yeah, your percentage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but it was wild birds is what got every dog I had that got them to what they were. And, you can train for about every situation, but you put them on wild birds and they get to handle wild birds. They can handle those field trial situations just like nothing.
Yeah.
But I remember I was going, like I said earlier, I was going to Salt Lake one time for a trial, and I had Jack. I had a whole bunch of dogs that we were bringing up through the ranks. You know, we got these 2 or 3 really good short hairs, and we probably had 20 that didn't make the cut.
Right.
You know? And so you just trade them or sell them as hunt dogs. But I went out to Mud Lake, and by this time, when I started getting these higher powered dogs, I had to get a horse. I bought a horse and a trailer, and, you know, because I couldn't keep up with them. And you wanted them running like they would run, because they had to win.
Yeah.
And so you'd get on a horse, and first horse I bought was a quarter horse, and that didn't work.
So that sounds like fun, running through the sagebrush.
Bouncing it, and you know, and you can't trot them in a field trial. And everybody was on their walking horses, and they was walking 15 miles an hour, and I was walking 3 miles an hour on my quarter horse. So that lasted one season. And I found a nice old field trial horse and bought him, and first walking horse. It was a Tennessee Walker, and he changed things big time, because you just had access. If you needed to gather a dog up, if he wasn't turning or something like that, you get on that horse and you could turn him. Mm-hmm. You know, and you become a cowboy in short order, whether you like it or not. And you get up, run, you know, a dog just going. And of course you can do it with a shock collar too. But back in them days, I liked to do it without it if possible. And I'd run that horse right up there and just haze that dog around. Get around, you know, giving him the instruction that I wanted by bringing him around. And it didn't take too long before they figured, they're smart. Mm-hmm. And they figured out exactly what you wanted. And then after they knew, then I would dig him with shock collar. I mean, this exact trial I was talking to you about with Jack. Well, before the trial, I went down and ran him. We left on Saturday, so I ran him. I always rested him on Friday. I ran him Thursday night. And I ran him for probably 45 minutes. And I had 25 contacts of wild birds, wild flushes, stopped and flushed, blank. We didn't kill them. We were just, because it wasn't the season. But I mean, that's the kind of stuff will make a bird dog when you have that kind of thing. And I went down there and turned him loose, and there was a guy by the name of Boyd Bronson, who was a professional down in Salt Lake. But he was really the old-time professional. He never owned a horse. And he finished 3 or 4 dogs for people around, you know, a good trainer, nice guy. And he was judging. And I was letting old Shiloh, or old Jack, get out, because he'd like to hammer around. If you'd let him, he could run all age. If you didn't say nothing, he was all age. So I liked that shooting dog area, just a little bit bigger than what everybody else's gun dog was going. And he was out there hammering around. I remember old Boyd saying, "You got control of that dog?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let me see you turn him." So I blew the whistle. Man, he come, and he won that stake. In fact, that trial, I won first place in every event: puppy, derby, amateur, gun dog, and limited gun dog.
And when was that? Where was that?
In Salt Lake.
Salt Lake.
That sure makes the
German
drive
Shorthaired
home
Club.
real nice.
And so let's clarify something, you know, for people listening. When you say Jack, we're talking about Byers Evolution.
Yeah, his call name was Jack.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to get out there. Evolution. Where's them pointers?
And I want to get to his story a little bit too.
Yeah, and I don't know why he was ever called that, but the guy, the breeder was Byer. Well, Byer was the guy's name. I don't remember his first name. Uh-huh. But he was in the club there in Otto Falls too. But anyway, to go to those trials, and I had a learning phase where I went probably 15 trials and never placed anything. Puppies, derbies, anything. That was my learning curve. My wife would say, "Quit wasting the money. Don't keep doing it," you know. Typical deal. Yeah. I said, I got to figure it out. I got to figure it out, fellas. Quit wasting the money. And anyway, but on the other hand, once you bring a dog like this into a field trial, you've got the upper hand, because people are looking at them. And if they do a good job, some of the judges, they weren't all real great judges. They'd think, Judas, that dog get good. He's been winning everything. Let's give it to Jack or to Shiloh. So you can get both ends of the scale.
Right.
And so it's
close, but
yeah.
Man, Jack's just been winning everything.
Yeah.
I think Jack should win.
Yeah, let's give it to him.
Yeah.
He must be good.
And that was a lot more fun to be on that end of the scale than the other.
And I'm sure there was a few times where, man, Jack's been winning everything. Second today it is.
Yeah, that happened with a couple of my little pointers a lot. The local people, there was one guy particularly that I just hated to run under because he was kind of jealous of the success that I had because he was trying to do it too. I couldn't win first place under him. It didn't matter what.
Yeah.
Second, third, I'd always place, but and Doc and I'd say, just do it, whatever.
So Shiloh was before Jack. Mm-hmm. You had him first.
Yep.
Both of those dogs, I got their pedigrees laying here in front of me to kind of reference. They're both kind of products of, I call it the Grouse dog and the Wasserschling.
You can look at them, you can see the Grouse in them.
They're basically very heavy Grouse.
Pull that.
Sorry.
Kick yours up a little bit, your mic up a little. Just there you go. Perfect.
All right. There, I'm sorry.
I'll help you out, Fred.
All right,
there
thank
you.
you.
Go, buddy.
And that's something I wanted to kind of highlight here in these discussions because, we're going to be discussing these kinds of dogs with some other people in the area as well in the next couple of days. But like the big three, in my mind, looking back at these old pedigrees, is Axel von Wasserschling, the Greif von Humscheiger-Kogel. I can't even say it right now. And then the Cave under Wahlberg.
When's the last time you saw? Well, this is Sebastian. You have
here's
Jake in there.
Here's Shiloh
or Jack. Sorry.
Here's Jack. So Jack was also the product of a half sister, half brother breeding. Yeah, and I'm assuming, and that's something else to touch on here a little bit in the discussions is Jim's knowledge and intuition about genetics.
Yep.
And
he was sharp on that stuff. He really knew what he was talking about on that stuff.
So this wasn't accidental. He didn't just stumble onto.
Well, I think it was probably accidental we stumbled onto these two dogs. But as soon as we've seen what we could see out of them, he checked pedigrees. He says, man, that's well-bred dogs,
Yeah.
Of course,
so did you guys, like at that point in time, were you dialed in on, Greif is the dog we need to get part of? Were people talking about him yet, or?
To a point, yeah. To tell you the truth, Doc was a lot more gung-ho about genetics, and if the dog performed, I liked that dog.
Yeah.
So that you fit well together.
If we fit well together, because, he had all the mental knowledge, and I had all the bronze, do the physical work. And I remember watching Jack when Bayer brought him out to some fun trials and everything. And Bayer actually come to us. Of course, we had Shiloh then. He knew we were into that field trial. And we had Snoopy coming on. That was one of Shiloh's pups.
Okay.
And he says, I don't think I can handle this dog. You guys interested in him?
Really?
And
so now we're talking about Jack.
Now we're talking about Jack. And so I talked to Doc, and I says, what do you think? He says, I like the dog. What do you think? I said, he looks like a handful, but, if we could get him under control, he'd probably be great. Because he was running him in at the Derby out there, and good hell, he was a mile and a half off that way and getting in his car to go find him, and, that kind of stuff. And he didn't have a horse. He had nothing. And he thought, I'm never going to be able to do justice to what this dog might have the potential of being. Of course, when you buy a Derby dog, you've got all the hopes in the world, but only about 1 in 10 is going to come out the way, if you're that lucky, of what you want him to be. But Jack was 10 times easier to train than Shiloh.
Really?
Jack was biddable. Shiloh was a black-hearted little bugger. He'd eat your lunch every chance he got. But Jack wasn't that way. And that's why so many different people won so many different stakes with him. You could take that dog and take him for a day, get him to know you, shoot a bird or two under him, and you could handle him in the field.
So you did that.
Yeah, because John, of course, John had him, and we called John Merrill.
John Merrill.
At Shiloh, and I said, John, I've got this dog that he's nice. I said, he's really nice. He said, well, what do you think he is basically compared to Shiloh? And I said, he's everything Shiloh was and then some. I said, he's biddable. He said, that's what I like. I said, and then Doc and him were good friends to start with, John.
Now, John was in California, right?
Bakersfield, California.
Yep.
And that's why we even used John, is because him and Doc, were friends. They talked a lot about things.
Uh-huh.
And he says, well, bring him down. So I loaded him up, took the whole family, and decided to go to Disneyland and make it. And we hauled him down. I'm trying to think. We had to spend some night. Can't remember what town it was. It was 100 degrees out there. And I thought, dog can't stay in that kennel. So I brought him in the room and laid him by the air conditioner, and he slept right there in the room with us because I was afraid he was going to die out there in the heat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, I took him down there and I showed John, what he was doing. And I put him through a lot of different things and told him, I says, this dog is broke at about any inch. And I think he won the first stake he put him in. And of course, after him winning that, he just kept winning and winning and winning. It was phenomenal. Go back to Shiloh just a minute. We almost lost him. Do you remember what year the Teton Dam broke?
76, I believe.
Okay, I had him in my back kennels, and it was a piece of junk kennels, but I had him back there. And we got notice that to get everything packed up, because I'm close to the river, you may have to evacuate. And that old dog box that you have, that your dad had.
You mean the trailer?
The trailer.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I put, I think, 8 dogs in there, and it was hot. It was in the summer. And I lifted the top up. The top will release, and you can let air out. Anyway, I left them in there for 2 or 3 hours because we thought we were going to have to leave. And they said, I don't think you're going to have to leave, so I got the dogs out. I got 7 of them out, couldn't find Shiloh. And he was actually passed out laying in the bottom of those kennels.
Wow.
And I drug him out, and I said, turn on the hose. And I put the cold water on him and started rubbing him, and he kind of,
wow.
5 minutes longer, I think he'd have died. But it never affected his stamina or anything. He was perfect after that. And I remember telling Doc that. You can imagine what your dad said.
Wow.
Yeah.
All the old cull dogs, they made it fine, but Shiloh.
Right. So let's talk about, did other people handle him in the trials?
The only one that handled
Shiloh.
Shiloh was John Merrill and myself.
Okay.
He wasn't, John may have had some of his really good clients try to run him in some amateur stakes. And he may have won a little bit, but he wasn't like Jack. You had to really stay on top of him, and you better never take your eye off of him from the minute you whistled him off, because he would if he could find a problem, he'd find it.
Yeah.
And going over, an example is there was a pond over there and some ducks on it. Well, old Shiloh gets along the edge and the ducks fly. Well, he's out there in the water trying to chase the damn ducks.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of stuff.
Right.
All the
He
time.
can swim as good as the ducks, too.
Yeah.
So, title-wise, how high did he go? Was he a national field champion?
Got second, runner-up at the AKC Nationals.
Okay.
Yep.
And so he was a field champion, amateur field champion.
That's as far as championship.
But now he was a top.
He was a winningest dog in the nation for a couple of years, I think.
2 years, 76 and 78.
And that was all from John. John, he just kept him down there and ran him. John liked him, but it's like I told you. He told me, don't x-ray him. He says, because he's been tuned up a time or two.
He's ran into some pellets.
Yeah.
A little bit of lead.
And mostly around the hind end. He was running backward.
What about breeding? How much did he get bred?
He got bred quite a bit. One of the best, and he has quite a few puppies that turned out to be champions.
So he produced well.
He did. And one of the breedings, he bred to Angel's Queen of Points, who was Steve Olson in Idaho Falls. We bred him twice, and I think that's who Snoopy was out of. And I think out of those 2 breedings, there was probably at least 5 or 6 field champions come out of those 2 breedings, and maybe even more, because there were some that John ran, and there was a guy in Ron Jackman in Salt Lake bought one, and he finally finished his dog. And so, they just matched up very well.
Yeah. So this is, this is a classic blend of the Wasserschling on the top.
Yeah.
So Blick von Schimbeck was his father, who was a son of Esser's chick, who was a son of Axel.
Yep.
And on the bottom side, you have his mother was Frieda von Greif, and it's Greif, on both sides. I mean, it's all Greif.
Yeah.
The old Greif dog, which we'll learn more about the Greif dog. I mean, personally, did you ever see the old Greif dog?
Nope, I never did. Never did.
Okay.
Doc talked to me a lot about him, and told me the different things that they had to do in Germany in their field trials and stuff, that he said it's a big deal. He told me that in order for them to be a champion, they had to retrieve a fox through water to become a champion over there. Now, whether that was BS, I said, I'm glad we don't have to.
Right.
Was the fox dead or alive?
I don't know.
So then, going back to Jack, you bought him from the breeder.
Yep.
At about 1.5 years old. And you quickly saw his qualities.
I watched him at 2 or 3 fun trials, and I was impressed with what I saw. And then when I can't remember his first name. When buyers come up and said, "Are you interested in this dog?" We said, "Yeah, we'll buy him." And I don't think we paid. I don't think $300 or $400 for him.
And then in one of our discussions months ago, you talked about, seemed like somebody approached you to buy him.
Yeah, well, after he got all these titles, John wanted to keep him in California. And there was a guy down there that offered us $10,000 for him. And, of course, me being greedy, I had new dogs coming. I said, "Shit, let's sell him." Because I said he'll be bred down there a lot. Because John really liked him in his breeding program, and he bred a lot of dogs down there. And you get him clear up here, most people could care less. We had some flown in that was bred to him, but most of the breeding was done down in California.
Yeah.
And so I said to Doc, I said, maybe we ought to sell him. I had a couple other little dogs coming on pretty strong. They weren't short hairs, they were pointed. And Doc never was. He liked pointers because, when we'd go hunting, I had a little dog by the name of Addie. And that's who he said, "I'll take Addie." And she was a little pointer, but she was just so easy to handle. I'll tell you a story about old Doc. Pooter, he had a dog named Pooter. Do you remember Pooter?
I know Pooter, yeah.
And he was about like Shiloh.
Black-hearted.
Yeah. And we were hunting sage grouse up the Indian Creek. And I said, "Well, I'm going to go this way with the dogs, and you take old Pooter and go that way." And Phyllis was with him, just walking along visiting. So he blew Pooter, and he wanted to cut and go this way. And Pooter kept going and going, and Doc was blowing. Phyllis told me this story. She finally said, "Oh, hell, it's okay, Pooter. We'll follow you." And they took off and followed him. Never hardly controlled him the whole time.
Probably the best idea. Follow the dog.
Follow the dog.
Nose.
But Addie, he could handle really well, and he just loved to hunt behind her. And she was a bird-finding little dog, and he had a lot of fun with her.
I want to share this, and this is just one story, why these dogs are important. And it's my personal connection with your dog, Jack. And that is, he's a well-known dog in the Midwest. A friend of mine, and we're going back 20-some years, close friend of mine, John Shaver, and I was talking to Charles about this earlier. This is how I was introduced to Jack. As a close friend of mine, John Shaver, in the Missouri, Arkansas area. He's in Kansas even for a while. He got into German Shorthairs in the early 90s. And he started out, he was interested in NAVDA stuff, and he bought Stradivarius dogs. And he also had a Greif dog that was I can't remember her sire right now, but it's a well-known dog. And he bred her to a solid liver male that was making a mark named Zeal. And this dog's name was Zeal von Feinsmecker. Now, may not mean anything to you. Solid liver male. Bottom side was mostly Esser's Duke, Esser's Chick, that's solid liver. But Zeal was a son of Jack.
Oh, I see.
Okay?
Uh-huh.
So he went on to be a dual champion. The guys that trained him, Dave King and Lou Forbush, claimed that they could have taken him to the national level and won. They didn't, I guess, get a chance to do that. But my friend John bred to that Zeal dog and had a dog out of him that he named Jack.
Oh.
Razor Haven's Ripper.
Uh-huh.
That I hunted over, and I saw how phenomenal the dog was. He's like a thoroughbred. I just was so impressed with this dog. His athleticism, his stamina, his abilities, it was effortless. And he became an amateur field champion and was on his way to being a field champion. Got too hot on a summer day, took off and ran, got too hot, and he ended up dying.
Oh.
I bred to him one time. That was the only time anybody bred to him. But that's how I got to know about your dog, Byers Evolution.
And how did your pups end?
Oh, and these were phenomenal. Probably one of the best. One of the early breedings, maybe let's call it the first breeding I did. And maybe, for me, foundational, like one of the best breedings that I have on my resume.
Yeah.
And then John bred to Zeal again. So another grandson of your dog later that he ran, his name was Razor Haven's Revolution. That he finished his field champion and amateur field champion title in 5 weekends in the Midwest. And that was in I'll call it the mid-90s, late 90s. I'm kind of guessing right now, but it was in that late 90s period. Dog, dual champion. He got bred a few times. And now there's dogs today out of him that are, there's a lot of well-known dogs that go back to Rebel, Razor Haven's Revolution. So just so you can see, I know you probably don't hear about this stuff.
I don't anymore, no, but it's
but
too bad.
There's a lot of dogs out there that go back to, Shiloh and your dog Jack.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're here to, pull this back up to, the awareness of people out there today that are interested in their pedigrees and where their dogs came from.
Yeah.
That's where we were talking about. That's Thunder.
Exactly. So he's been running a dog for Kat and Ethan.
Yep.
And on the bottom, is the bottom side?
Top side.
Benny the Jet.
Yep.
So
His
dual
sire.
champion, Rick Hopkins, Brenda Rowe have the dog in the Georgia. And Benny's bottom side has your dog Jack, Byers Evolution, in there. Rick Hopkins used to live out here in Arizona and probably knows a lot of the people that you ran, in your circles back in those days. But, it's just, he's still making his mark on the breed. Is what
good.
I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
That's great. Well, he was, as far as short hairs, he was the most biddable short hair that I had ever handled. He trained the easiest.
What about retrieving?
No problem. Natural retriever. Just as natural. Soft mouth. Never chewed. It was just all natural to him. Mm-hmm. And he just loved to do it. And the thing that I was so impressed with him is that he was so what I considered honest. Mm-hmm. Some dogs look like looking to make a mistake. And he wasn't that kind of a dog. He just, after time after time, it just like he was a machine out there. Mm-hmm. And when you had him at a trial, the galleries were big when he come to the line because he was well known. you know, people, and he would win.
That had to feel good.
It did. Yeah. It's like I said, it's a lot better to be on the winning side.
Yeah.
And it was fun. He was so much fun.
Now, did you have scouts then? That
Occasionally, but not much. You didn't need one. He would handle enough that.
So the handler pretty much.
Yeah, I think John probably scouted him when he was running all age, you know, because they'd get completely out of sight and he'd want to know what was going on.
So you ran him. You ran him as an all age dog.
I didn't, because they had very few all age stakes. John did. Yeah, this national chucker championship. I'll show you the thing. He won all age in that deal.
Okay.
But John ran him both all age and shooting dogs. What he really was, he was just a beautiful, and he would control well enough if you wanted to walk. You know, like in a bird field, we had about that time was getting less and less bird field.
They shoot birds in the bird field?
Uh-huh.
Yep.
You just blank everything in the back course.
Yep.
22-minute back course, and then finish up in the bird field. And you could get off and handle him around there just like he was on a leash. I mean, you know, if you didn't want him over there where that other dog, get over here and we'll go this way. And he just point and point and point. And I, as far as breaking on an actual, you know, shoot to kill, after I got him broke, I don't think he did that 2 or 3 times the rest of his career. It's just.
Now, you told me in an early conversation that with him, he was never trained on liberated birds. With Jack.
No.
All wild birds.
Well, you know, pigeons is how I got him broke, stopped. But then from then on, everything was wild birds. Never, nothing else on. I never, you know, like you guys will turn loose a bunch of quail or something. Mm-hmm. None of that kind of stuff. It was either a planted pigeon or, you know, before trial. After he was doing perfect on pigeons, you'd go buy a pheasant or two so he could get, or a chucker, you know, to get the difference. But no, everything else was sage grouse from the word go. I think I told you about hunting him.
Yeah.
Up on sage grouse.
I was hoping you'd bring that story up again. Can you?
Yeah. I used to like to hunt sage grouse horseback quite a bit. And there was a little spot up there called Scheinberger, just on the Montana border. And their sage grouse season was a little longer than ours, so I'd buy a sage grouse season ticket or deal in Montana. And I took up 2 different times. I had Addie, Letty, Snoopy, and Jack up there. And I'd turn them loose on a good walking horse. I'd turn them loose all at once. And the country was like this, just big, wide open. And I mean, they'd scatter like a covey of quail. And you'd ride out there and kind of trying to keep track of who. And there'd be a dog on point here and one on point there and one, because there was that many birds. And you just go over and work this and shoot it, get on your horse, go to all 4 of them and just stand there till you was done. It was all over.
Sounds pretty magical there.
4 points, 4 birds.
It was close to heaven as you're ever going to get if you like bird dogs.
It sounds like heaven, man.
It just was unbelievable. More birds than you would ever want, and quality dog work. Because as you'd shoot the one, you'd bring the other dog in, hit back, go shoot, let the one on point retrieve, do all 4 of them. Just like nothing.
And you hunted by yourself?
I did up there, yeah. Yeah, because nobody else had horses to go.
So you just hook up the trailer, load up the horse and the dogs?
Go up there and turn them loose, yeah.
Did you camp out or did you?
No, it's only an hour drive.
Okay. Pretty nice.
It was, I did it a lot. I mean, because it's just a bird hunter's dream.
Yeah.
You know, to do something like, particularly be on a horse. I mean, that kind of tied the whole thing in together because the dogs would run big and big and big. And a sage grouse will hold. They won't run out like a pheasant.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, Gary Stevens, you're going to go talk to him.
Right. Tomorrow.
This is a trial. I went over to, it wasn't a short hair, it was a pointer I had, but he was judging an American field trial over there. Alibi Letty strike and turned her loose and smoking up through there. And I think she had, if I remember right, it seemed like she come on point and the other dog stole her point. And they worked it anyway, cast her off again and went into this big heavy cover, which the gallery rode right through. She was on point in there, and we didn't see her. And this was, I think it was our stake, if I remember right. And this was 35 minutes into the stake. And I couldn't find her. And I had a scout, and he couldn't find her. We'd look and come back around. There was about 10 minutes left, and the scout yells, "Point!" And she was back in that sagebrush that we first rode through.
You rode right past her.
And so I called point. Gary, come over with me. We were riding along. He says, "If that dog has a bird stand there after that long," he says, "I can't give you first, but she'll get runner-up." He said, "I didn't see her run enough."
Yeah, didn't see her.
And she had a pheasant in there, and I flushed it, and she got runner-up. I don't know if Gary remembers that or not, but he said
he probably will.
She'd been there a long time for that bird, particularly pheasants,
Yeah.
'cause they'll run.
Yeah.
But she was just standing tall on both ends, just quivering. It was
That's awesome.
a lot
Awesome
of
stories.
A lot of memories.
One of the first times I ran, I think it must have been puppy. Maybe it was Derby. It might have been Derby because we went first. I bet it was Derby. And second brace. And one of the handlers came over and said, "Hey, we saw a bunch of pheasants run into this bush. Avoid that bush. There's a bunch of pheasants in there. And the first thing I did was went straight there with my pheasant dog. She nailed it, and in Derby. So I went in and flushed, and I think she went with it because I didn't have her steady then. But everybody in the gallery came, "Oh, thank you so much for getting rid of those pheasants." And meanwhile, you guys are running on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they were all worried their dogs were going to get into those wild birds. And I was, nope, that's where I'm headed.
We had some trials up in Allen Park, up in the Centennial, towards Centennial Valley, that all the big guys had come to. And we actually would have sage grouse and blue grouse that were found besides the planted birds that was found. And that was really, those wild birds would take a lot of those dogs out that weren't used to them. But dogs that could handle them, those handlers really thought that was a cool trial.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Were they groups ever, or was it always single?
Mostly just singles, maybe a pair.
Uh-huh.
And it only lasted for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 braces. By then they moved off.
Yeah.
Because we were running the same course.
That's what I like about the Iowa NAVDA Invitational site is almost everybody first brace is going to work a wild pheasant. Might not be pointed, might be a stop to flush, but almost everybody's going to get a work one.
That's good.
Which everybody gets on pins and needles about that. But
one thing we talked about touching on a little bit was Doc's knowledge of genetics, and maybe we can just kind of hit on that a little bit. Like he did a lot of writing about it.
He did.
And what was the name of the?
It's of Peas and Pups.
And that's pretty well known. That's a pretty well known piece on genetics and inheritance.
It's I believe, as I recall, it's like a 10-segment thing that was published over a matter of several years, actually.
Okay.
And I was just the other day, I think I ran onto the notes and stuff for that. I had all the magazines and stuff that it was in, but I was missing one issue, and I think I've got the issue now. I think I have the background of it. I don't think I have an issue, but I've got all the information.
So one question I have is, was he self-taught, or did he study genetics in college, or?
Well, he was a dentist, so he had some sort of a medical background and that sort of thing, but he was he got into it. He just got into it and went for it.
And he was a proponent of line breeding, right? Yeah.
And when you guys moved, did you have short hairs when you moved to Idaho Falls, or
No.
you got them when you got out there?
He'd never really been in a situation where he could have it. Basically, we'd always lived in apartments and stuff like that.
Well, he was in the military, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we did live in a house there for part of that time, but it was on base, so you weren't. I don't think you could have pets.
When you say in Idaho Falls?
No, Cheyenne,
Wyoming.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a graduate of the University of Kansas City in Missouri.
Oh, okay.
As was his uncle and his grandfather. It's third generation dentist. Yeah.
Okay.
All from Missouri.
Nice.
Actually, his sister went to Creighton. She was.
Wow.
how much do you think they had to talk about how much dentistry changed in 3 generations?
Oh, it's
Holy.
incredible. My my cousin, his sister's son, just retired a few years ago. So 4th generation in the family. And that's a fun thing that we talk about. In fact, he has like a box he inherited through my dad, a box of the tools that you used in the late 1800s.
That was a
cool
that was a 5-pound sludge. And
oh God,
a chisel,
they're horrible.
and a bottle of whiskey.
No kidding. It's amazing. Yeah. So, so he then went into practice with his uncle, who lived in Winfield, Kansas.
Yeah. Yep.
And during World War II, when the war first started, they drafted all of the medical and dental students in the whole country. And so as the war progressed and they were sure they were going to win, they dumped those guys out and said, you still owe us some time. So yeah.
That's why he had to do some time.
When the Korean War came along, they redrafted these guys, and it was a pretty good deal. I don't know what his 2 choices were, but he got a choice of where he was going to be stationed, and he chose Cheyenne. He and my mom had been kind of westering, and that was their plan. Mm-hmm. And so we spent a couple of years in Cheyenne, and they did a lot of scouting. We spent a lot of time in Jackson and those, around there. But as his time got up, they figured where they're going to go, and they decided on Idaho Falls. It's really the center of incredible outdoor activity, hunting, birds and big game and, everything, fishing, the whole bit.
Right.
And scenery.
And fabulous.
The drive-in was,
it's
exactly.
unreal.
Yeah, it's unreal.
Exactly. And I think they would have picked Jackson, but they thought that this education was better for me over on this side of the mountain. So that's where we showed up. And as soon as we got here, he got a German Shorthair. I don't know what his, how he decided all of that. I think he looked into it quite a bit, and I remember him talking at that time about, this is a dog that can do everything.
Yeah.
It was really, that was his thing. He wanted a dog that could do it all. And so we got a little, in fact, her name was Lady. I was going to say a little bitch, but
It's okay.
her name was Lady. She didn't last too long. But then we got a couple of dogs. I got one and he got one. And so we had some fun with that. And then somebody stole them, I think. They just disappeared one day and never saw them again. And after that, I don't know. Maybe Ron knows. Hubert Stippa.
I remember the name. Yeah.
Yeah, but
it was a little before my time.
Yeah, he was from Germany, and he was a breeder, and I think he was over in the Boise area, but my dad might have actually gotten another couple of dogs before he got Asta. That dog was from Stippa. The other dogs, he got this dog called Fritz.
Her pedigree right here. Asta.
What's Asta?
Yeah.
Is on there? Yeah.
I mean, just so.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a notebook you handed me. It's full of, it's pedigrees and original certificates on dogs that were born in the 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
German pedigrees. It's.
I think Asta was from Germany, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, here's her pedigree right here.
Back in those days, Doc was just breeding these dogs to hunt. It was just
he wasn't even
enjoyment.
The Fritz was an interesting case because his testicles never came down. So
really?
And that's how he got Moose.
Oh,
because Moose was the guy said, "All right, I understand. No, he's not. There's not going to. Here, would you take this other dog?" And so that's how we got Moose.
Well, he got a replacement dog.
Yeah, exactly. But so I think Asta was the first serious breeder that he got.
I think she was born in 57. I may be wrong on that, but she was imported in 1962.
Yeah, that would be.
And she was, pedigrees right here. I can't pronounce all the names.
Right.
German dog.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I think that's when he got interested in serious breeding.
Well, I know Doc had a dog or two that he sent, I think, with John Merrill beforehand, but he never did do any winning in the trials. But he was so active in our club, in the short hair club, that he was the secretary and was involved in all the field trials, and he just loved to watch the dogs.
Well, here's a Radbach. There's a bunch of Radbach dogs in here.
I think Fritz von Radbach, maybe.
This one's Prinz.
Prinz
von Radbach.
Oh, now that could be from the P litter, Hooter, Plato, Prinz. I forget what all the other names were on that bunch.
There's a dog.
That's when he.
Graf von Radbach. This is Radbach both sides.
I like this because it says, I'm assuming that he typed this up, and at the top it says,
the litter
of 2 pups I received for a stud fee.
Yeah.
What do pups cost now to buy a really well-bred pup?
It can be anywhere. I'm going to throw a number out, a range, anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000.
Yeah.
Really?
I'd say
Depending on the
2.
breeder.
Plan on 2, and if you can find one for less than 2, you'd probably be pretty happy.
Huh?
And you may not want to find one for less than 2.
Well, and you may find one that's more than 2 that shouldn't be more than 2. But
right,
a lot of times people,
exactly.
I'm sure, like they did then. Somebody sees that pups are going for $10 more than they sold them for, so they bump it up $10. And
I think in those days, 200 is about what we were talking about.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
We're talking 70 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like now, like then, you get a couple breeders talking to each other, and you'll swap some pups, and if you know somebody's really into it, you're like, I really want you to get one of my pups because you're gonna take it, you're gonna campaign
do justice to it.
Yep. And I know you're gonna hunt it. It's gonna have a good life, so I want you to have a pup. So what does it take? I got to give it to you. What can we do? And so there's some of that, but yeah, it's I would say 2 seems to be kind of the starting price now for something that's well bred. And
one of the things also I wanted to ask you, can you name some of the contemporaries at your time when you were running? Like you mentioned John Merrill. Who else?
Dave McGinnis. He was in Boise. Him and John were the 2 probably the most prominent professional trainers, done more winning than most of the rest of them. I'm trying to think of some of those guys' names.
What about Holcomb? Did you run across Holcomb?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Holcomb.
sure.
Oh, yeah. Yep, that was...
Miner?
Oh, Don Miner.
Don Miner. He was with John Merrill. Him and Merrill were buddy.
Yeah, well, my dad and Don Miner were thicker than thieves.
Yeah.
Oh, they were?
Yeah.
I knew Don really well through the gym.
Yeah. In fact, now that's somebody I know because when I went to Santa Clara University and he lived in Saratoga, and I go out and visit him out there. I actually, it was fun. It's the most amazing place, actually. They lived literally in the center the main intersection of the town was like right up the hill from them, and you went down one of those streets, and then you made kind of a circle, and their house was like in a little valley, right? And it was totally surrounded by trees and stuff. You thought you were way out in the country, and you were literally right downtown.
Oh, really?
It was neat. Yeah.
He was a big time breeder. Don done a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Him and Doc were,
Don Miner.
Uh-huh.
And Parks.
I remember the name Parks, but
Ralph?
I never didn't really get to know him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gary, now you're going to go talk to Linda too.
Right.
What's her last name now?
Combs, I think.
See, when she, let's see, Linda Cross, it seems like.
Cross. It's Cross.
It? Yeah, Linda Cross.
I'm sorry, yeah, it's Cross.
Yeah. And I, I was running when she was running and all, but Dave ran her dog all the time for her.
And when you say her dog, we're talking about Ambertall's Lancer D.
No, that's Jim Reed's. We're talking about Eric or Abe.
Oh, Eric or Abe. Yep.
And he was a good dog. I mean, he was a winning dog.
Which one?
Eric, well, both.
Did you ever see both of those dogs?
Oh, yeah. Watched them both all the time. Yeah, and Lancer was a big old solid liver dog. Jim Reed owned him. And I don't know if Jim ever did run him. I think Dave probably ran him most of the time.
Uh-huh.
And see, I don't know what the deal was, but John was not going to a trot to the Nationals, or Doc and John got in some kind of, I don't know, I can't remember. But we actually had Dave's son, Mike, who you've been trying to take Jack to the Nationals. And he won the National Gun Dog Shooting Dog. Mike McGinnis did with Jack.
Okay.
And he'd never been around him. I mean, he competed against him a lot, but I sent him over there a week or so early, and he got to know him and went down there and won the Nationals. Oh. He was just that.
Now, did he run against Lancer?
No, I don't. Lancer was a little before him.
Okay.
Yeah, and Lancer was an all-age dog. He never ran anything but all-age.
Okay.
And that's kind of what old Abe was too, as I remember. He was, and I think Linda got him in. I think he's a dual champion and all kind.
Yeah.
But I don't think I don't think she ever did anything with the dog. She probably bought it and gave it to Dave, because her and Dave were really pretty thick at the time, and she wasn't what you'd call, I wouldn't know her if she walked in. I knew her back then to see her, but we weren't friends. I mean, she wasn't out socializing.
Yeah.
Some of the old guys, you'd socialize with, and some of them you knew their dogs, and you didn't hardly know them. But
Right.
Jim Reed was he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
Well, what else you got?
What's that?
What else you got?
I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And
got anything else you guys want to add?
Just appreciate you coming out and stirring up old memories that I haven't thought about for 30 years.
Can we flip through these pictures?
Maybe.
Yeah, I can. And actually, like I said, I'll take some stills of everything too.
Rough grouse. Then that's
and that's their strutting.
Is that
that's a blue.
That's a blue grouse.
Yep, and that's another blue. Of course, that's a bird.
And these are photographs you took.
Yeah.
And then these are rooster pheasants fighting. There's somewhere in here here we go. The sage grouse.
Yep.
Photos.
That was just early in the morning, just sunrise. You got good colors. He was standing on there, getting ready to impress the women.
and
that's just before their airbags come out. You can see those slots in their chest. That's where the airbags come out.
And then that's a hen.
That's a hen right here in my yard drinking out of a puddle.
And then here's that's a hun.
Yep, that's a hun. That's sharp tail fighting.
And you got sharp tails around here, and this is a sharp tail booming.
Yep.
Cool. No prairie chickens.
No prairie chickens. Nope. Sharp tails as close to them as we've got.
Yeah. Interesting, though, it's the so many types of prairie birds our country has.
There it is.
That are native.
Yeah.
But so many people don't realize, they don't even know these birds exist. They think pheasants and Hungarian partridge and chukars are native, and they're not.
No, they're not. You can tell that Hungarian.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and Chinese pheasants.
Yeah.
So.
But the sage grouse numbers here have depleted enough that you have to buy a tag now, and you're allowed one grouse a year.
Really?
$30 for a tag. $90 for a non-resident for a sage grouse. And they sell them. I mean, they sell the designated amount. But it's more habitat is what's caused the bird numbers to go down. Mm-hmm. They've just developed so much country that used to be prime sage grouse, and they've just, farming it. Everybody's farming it now, and we've lost them. And it's too bad we don't have the pheasants, to kind of replace them. But they use so many chemicals, and there's no cover for the pheasants when they have these circles.
Well,
I lived through probably the best time for wildlife in this area. I was born in 46, and through the early years, this whole country was a 2-deer area for mule deer, and you'd go up and hunt. The season opened like October 5th and would run until December 15th. And during the rut, Dad had a little Jeep Universal, and we'd go up through here. You'd have to chain up on all fours.
You guys have a Jeep too?
Yeah. And we'd go up and hunt, and you'd see 300 or 400 head of deer in a day, easy. And then come back the next weekend, there hadn't even been anybody on your tracks.
Wow.
And now you can't go a day without people everywhere.
Yeah.
But this area right here, there's a lot of elk. In fact, I ought to show you the sheds that I've found this year. I do a lot of shed hunting. In fact, that lab, I trained him to hunt sheds. Does really good for deer and antelope. But the first elk shed, which I wanted him for, he picked it up on the end and it come around and gouged him. So that's enough of that.
Wow. Got it.
But anyway, I do want to show you this trophy and tell me if you think this would actually be another national title that Jack would have. I don't know.
Yeah.
The trophy says National Chucker Championship.
Yeah.
But I've never seen it.
Well, I think that was an actual event.
It had to have been to be that.
Right.
Where he won it, so he would actually have another national title.
Yeah. We'll look at that.
But
I just want to say thank you to you guys. It's been, it's just like talking to you the first time. It's so easy. And I'm so grateful to have the chance to visit with you guys about your experience with the short hairs. And
greatest time of my life, probably back in them days. You'd go to the trials and your butterflies and what's going to happen. And, and the excitement of it. And if you won, you was walking in tall clover, and if you didn't, you was kicking cans down the road.
Well,
and my discussion with my wife after every trial, how successful we were, is what the discussion was about. And if I won a bunch of money or shotguns, things were good.
Yeah.
But if we'd done nothing but spend money, it wasn't quite so good.
Yeah.
And back then at entries, what does it cost to enter a dog now?
I don't know for
in a field trial. I don't know. I would say $50
probably.
Yeah.
I'll bet that puppy might be a little less because they try to get people to come in and they don't put birds out for puppy.
I think it was $18.
The first one's not free.
$18 for a broke steak and $10.
Yeah, I want to say I haven't run in a trial in 5 or 6 years, 6 at least.
It's been way longer than that.
So I want to say it was right around 60 for open.
Yeah. Well, those nationals, when they'd go to those, that was a week event, and they would run all the dogs, and then they'd call back so many, and run them, then call back, and then there was like 3 or 4 for the last day, and I remember one of those stakes, and it might have been Shiloh, one of those dogs. They were the 2 dogs for the either runner-up or winner. And they said, boys, we're just going to run them till the first dog makes a mistake. And I think that was Shiloh. He got runner-up, as I remember. He said, we don't care what happens. The first one that makes a mistake, we're done because we're tired of riding.
I'm sure after a week.
Oh, man.
Boy, can you imagine seeing the quality of dogs?
What an awesome opportunity.
And I used to judge as much as I could, but I would rather compete than judge. So I'd rather go to them. But it was fun. It was stake them old dogs out. And Doc was, his dad had quite a sense of humor. And he would go to all the trials with us. And my wife would go and my kids, and kind of an outing, And Phyllis was into his office getting some teeth fixed. We were going to leave that Friday night. And Doc, being the jokester he was, and his receptionist was around there, and he says, Phyllis, should I get a queen bed or a couple of singles? See, and he was making the impression her and him was going to go to the whole, and he said those receptionists, their eyes got he was all the time joking.
Well,
funny.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say one more thing. I was tempted to bring him and Jack today, but they're not very photogenic anymore.
They're-
But Jack is the only dog that he ever had cremated and kept the
Still have
ashes
their
and
ashes.
stuff. So they're eventually they're probably going to be buried together.
Really?
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
Wow, that's
actually.
a cool story
Well,
right there.
the thing is that my dad said more than once, he said, if there aren't any dogs in heaven, he says, I'm going to turn around and leave.
I'm sure that
And he was serious about it.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah. And
for
actually,
me to hear
yeah.
these stories firsthand like this
Yeah.
brings these things to life. It's different
Yeah.
than reading about them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And actually, one more. This is appropriate because he always said, always leave him laughing. And the night before he died, he was out with the dogs every night out there on the hill. He'd take them out and run them. And he twisted his knee a little bit. And so the next day he went to see his chiropractor. And the guy worked on his knee a little bit, put a cold pack on, and said, okay, you lie here for about 20 minutes, I'll be back. And the chiropractor left, and his office assistant left with him. As she was leaving, he said, could you turn that light off? You know how in medical, it's always right in your face. He says, I need my beauty sleep. and a couple of minutes later, the other chiropractor was just over a divider in the next, and he said he heard a groan and called out my dad's name, and he was gone.
Really?
Yeah.
That fast.
Yeah,
Wow.
that fast.
That fast.
What a way to go, huh?
I put my
Wow.
request in at that very moment that I heard about it. Yeah, I said, that's the way I want to go.
Man. Laying on a table,
Yeah.
asked the nurse to turn off the light,
Yep, because he needs his beauty sleep.
and he went to sleep.
He was
Wow.
quite a guy. I had many hours of enjoyment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's special right there.
And I appreciate you guys coming out. That was fun to just reminisce about old things. As yet, I haven't thought about a lot of that stuff for years and years and years.
Well,
Yep, I look forward to it. Look forward to everybody getting to hear this. And I think, like we talked about, I hope it's something that can live on beyond all of us, and that somebody, the way that we look at Axel and our pedigrees and counts and stuff, and somebody can look back and find, can find Jack, can find all these dogs, and can get a little piece of information about, what their dog that shows up, if they're line breeding correctly, maybe 20, 30 times in a 10 generation pedigree, and they'll get a little idea, and they can go, maybe I see a little bit of that too.
Yeah. Well, that's what it's the genetics that's carrying forward.
Yeah.
It's the same. I mean, we're carrying that DNA. It's now several generations later. We've got that set, and I think it's good for people to understand where it came from.
It is. Yeah.
It's a product of
those dogs were actual real dogs. They just weren't a picture or something else.
Yeah.
And they were competitive and they were fun. Mm-hmm. I'll give your young guys a tip for training. Stay one step ahead of your dog. If you can prevent him from making a mistake, then you don't have to correct it and go through the process. So just try to anticipate what your dog's going to do in that circumstance while you're training, and stay one step ahead.
There's one thing you've mentioned a few times, this gadget that that Doc devised, the bird.
Go get that with you.
Can we see that before this is over? Because you've explained it to me a few times.
Absolutely.
So here it is.
It's called a bird pin.
Okay, a bird pin.
And I'll explain how it worked.
I'll unwrap it. Talk about old
So this
tape.
is an invention by Jim.
Doc.
Yeah.
Okay. You pound this in the ground, and he had a loop here with a string looped out to this. You'd put this through here. We usually use, depending on what we're trying to do, but we'd either use elastic bands or yarn, loop it on the pigeon, pound this into the ground to where it was flush, and then put it in there and put the pin in.
Now wait a minute. That pin is connected to your actual stake. The cotter key.
No, there's a ring around this with a piece of string to that onto this, and then a long string.
Okay.
20 yards out.
So now your pigeon is...
You pound this into the ground so it's flush.
Uh-huh.
Your pigeon is the yarn or the elastic band is stuck in there. That holds your pigeon now.
Okay.
And if you got a dog, let's say you've got a dog, and I can remember using this with Snoopy, because Snoopy would always, he developed a habit when I went into flush, he would start to, get down a little bit, what so many dogs do. He'd lose that real intensity. So I started figuring, so I'd pound this in and put the bird on there. And that way, as soon as he let down, I'd pull the pin and the bird would flush.
So you had a string.
Yeah, and somebody else would pull
the
string.
pin. The bird flies away. It's got a string on its leg.
No, just a little piece of
short
twine.
one.
Okay.
That was holding it down.
They go back to the coop
To the loft,
Yeah.
yeah. And they'll pick the yarn off.
Yeah.
Or else, and then puppies, when you're trying to get a puppy, we'd use an elastic band because the bird would be there flushing. And
so then the bird's jumping around.
And then the puppy, I look at that, and it'd head right in there. If he pointed, fine. If he didn't, pull the pin, the bird would fly away.
Now I see what you're talking about.
Yeah. That Snoop dog, and he was really a good dog except for that one problem, and I got it corrected. But the way I corrected is with this, or I would put the bird completely tight and have somebody out there with a string, and not on the bird but on the bush. Mm-hmm. And as he started let down, he'd pull it in the bush.
Oh yeah.
So then he knew the program. I'm going to go in there and flush the bird.
Yeah.
And so then he never knew when the bird was, and that's how I got it. And he got over that. After that, there was no problem. So you just have little things. You just have to figure out how to correct them and solve them.
Yeah.
I've only had one dog that I haven't been able to figure out what to do yet, and I've got it right now.
Is it the little one?
No. It's a pointer, and the guy that owns this is my age, and I've loved to bring up pups, but he's not going to live long enough to bring, because he's tough on a dog, and I do all the dog handling. So I've tried to buy some dogs that were pretty well started, so I could just kind of finish them for what we're doing here. Mm-hmm. I bought a dog from California. It's a pointer, and I brought him out here, and the guy said, "Oh yeah, he's broken. He didn't point. He wouldn't heel. He wouldn't do nothing."
Really?
And I thought, boy, I got screwed here. And so I kept putting him on Grouse, and he'd run through him and never even flinch at him. Mm. Well, I finally shot one and let him carry it and pack it, and that kind of got him onto it. And now he will come on point and looks like $1 million. I mean, that tail is 12 o'clock, just as intense as can be. And as I go walking up, he'll break that just like he blinked a bird. Just turn and go straight out that way.
Wow.
Gonna run around hunting. Then as I get closer, he'll come run, point it again.
Wow.
I have scratched my head, and I said, whoa. I think I'm going to go through. Yes. I think he's been shocked. I don't dare use a shock collar on him, because
it's like
he's been burnt.
Something.
So I'm going to do a lot of obedience and try to. So when I say whoa, if you're running out there, you whoa and you stay there. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing. And really, for falconry, like we're doing, it doesn't matter. But in my mind, it just ticks me off.
Yeah.
So what are you leaving for? You're looking so good.
Yeah.
But that's the only one that I haven't been able to figure out. Yeah. Any suggestions?
I'd say maturity. To me,
well, he's 5.
Oh, he's 5.
Yeah.
I thought he was a young dog.
No, he was
then maturity's not the problem.
He's been shocked.
Yeah, he's had too much
scrambled. I think.
Yeah.
He won't blink a bird. You know how too much pressure they'll smell, and then he'll just stack up like $1 million.
But he anticipates you coming.
Well,
maybe
if I stay at the truck for a while, he said, "I'm not going to hang around here. Hell, you'll go out there and hunt her."
Maybe he's
never flushed the bird when he come back.
You think he's bored?
I don't know.
Maybe shooting some for him more. Because the falcons are what ends up taking the bird.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe if he had some more shot for him and he connected that,
it could be
that a little bit. Maybe he's just.
The guy told me, he says you'll never be able to work him on planted birds.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And so that's why it kind of got me thinking.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, yeah, if he said that, he knew something then.
Right.
And to me, he really ripped me off. But and I think anybody else that had not somewhat familiar with dogs would have shot him. So, well, I lost $2,500 there. I'm gonna take my lump. But he runs beautiful. He's just like glass out there. Runs big and stands top high on both ends. And then
Just leaves.
he's not going to be here for a while. I'll go look somewhere else.
Yeah, I'll come back to this.
The strange part is, like I said, he has never bumped the flock or the single bird that's there. And he doesn't always come back right to place, but he always comes downwind. And I get him broke. I mean, he'll stand there while the bird flushes. That's it. A lot of them's got mental problems. There's no question. And that's where the mental problems come from is the trainers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, man.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Let's look at this trophy.
Yeah, thank you.